So the Super Mario Bros. Movie is finally out after like 5 years of development, and suffice it to say that the reception is a bit divided. I think a lot of us were expecting this to be a juggernaut family film with pretty decent reviews, but right now, it's certified rotten on Rotten Tomatoes. Critics are slamming the movie for putting forward an extremely thin plot and trying to cover it up with Easter eggs and nostalgia bait. They've been pretty tough on this one. Some of them have even said that it's worse than the live-action 90s Mario movie.
What do we do? I'm getting arrested for being a plumber.
So let's talk about it. Are the critics right about the Mario movie? What does this mean for the future of video game movies? And did Nintendo make a terrible mistake? Let me start by giving you some of my thoughts on the Mario movie. First of all, despite the title of the video, I did actually enjoy the movie. I usually talk about Marvel stuff on this channel nowadays, but I wasn't into Spider-Man growing up. I was into Mario. I had a DSi, I had a Wii, and I've probably spent more hours on playing New Super Mario Bros. Than any other game. So as long as this movie wasn't a complete train wreck, Nintendo already had me on lock. That doesn't make the movie immune to criticism though. Let's talk about the plot. I'll try not to spoil much, which shouldn't be too hard because there isn't really much to spoil. The plot is pretty basic and predictable. There's no real depth or meaning to anything that happens in the movie. What you see is exactly what you get. Every event that takes place is solely happening to move the plot along, which I suppose is necessary in any movie, but what I mean is that there's nothing more to it. There aren't many emotional moments, and we only get little obligatory pepperings of character arcs and overall messages. Mario is basically the same guy throughout the entire movie. It's just that at the start, people think that he's a loser, and at the end, people think he's a hero. But it's not like he learned any lessons or grew as a person. Of course, he has his fish out of water moments, but we see from the start that he's actually a very capable person. This goes for pretty much every character in the movie. They're just there to push the story forward. And you know what? That would be fine if the story was good enough to carry the movie, but it's not. At any point in this movie, you can probably guess what's going to happen next. It's a pretty cookie-cutter plot. That would also be fine if that was the only issue. It is a Mario movie after all. Mario games usually don't have complex plots, since Miyamoto is allergic to story. A lot of Marvel movies have predictable plots as well, and they're mostly well received, but they also put characters first. At least they used to. Recently they've had a similar problem. When we don't have great characters or a great story, it just feels like we're watching things happen to people. So what does this movie do right then, if it's not the characters or the story? Well, it's the setting. The Mushroom Kingdom is vibrant and teeming with life. It's not like you're watching Avatar or Demon Slayer or Into the Spider-Verse, but it's not trying to be any of those things. As far as illumination goes, it's pretty good. Very colorful, very detailed, doesn't feel low budget at all, no complaints there. Most of the characters look different from the games, but it's not jarring and it makes sense for what they needed in a movie. The movie is also filled to the brim with references to the games, from items, to enemies, to blocks and platforms, especially when Mario first enters the Mushroom Kingdom. If you're familiar with the games, you'll really enjoy seeing them brought to life, along with the Mario soundtrack, at least when they're not playing licensed music. It is still Illumination, after all. The comedy was hit or miss for me. Some of it was good, some of it was kind of meh, but I'm just glad there weren't any fart jokes or dabbing or anything. My favorite bit was a nihilist Luma, which was surprising to see in this quote-unquote kids movie, but it was welcome nonetheless. The voice work was also pretty good overall, other than maybe Cranky Kong. Chris Pratt was surprisingly fine, and Anya Taylor-Joy and Charlie Day might not sound like Peach and Luigi from the games, but they encompass their movie personalities perfectly. I don't even need to mention Jack Black because we all know he's the standout here. The trailers made Bowser seem really cool, so I was a little disappointed when they turned him into a joke, but whatever. It's a Mario movie, it's Jack Black, it's Illumination, it's fine. He's usually treated pretty comedically in the games anyways, and he would be pretty dull if he was completely devoid of humor, so it's fine. I also like Donkey Kong's characterization and personality. His little spat with Mario was fun to watch. Girl Boss Peach is also cool, but she's completely different from Game Peach. Game Peach is really confident and assertive in her own right, so I'm not saying she needed to be a damsel in distress. It makes complete sense for Mario to save his brother instead of some random princess, so I totally get it, but I don't know, there's just some sort of personality disconnect. It just feels like if they introduce Daisy in the future, she'll be the same person. Speaking of Mario and Luigi, They have a couple of emotional moments, which is a highlight for me in this movie. It's heartwarming to watch, and they have great brotherly chemistry whenever they interact. Overall, as a Mario fan, I enjoyed the movie, and I think they did a pretty good job. I'd probably rate it like a 6 out of 10, maybe a 7, 6.5. I'd recommend it if you're a Nintendo fan or if you have young kids. It's a good movie, but it's not as great as it could have been. Let's talk about that kid's point. When you watch the movie, it's extremely apparent that it's targeted towards young kids more than anyone else. If you're a teenager or an adult, you're going to be bored by this movie, unless you have kids with you that are enjoying it, which I guess will make you enjoy it via osmosis, or you've played Mario and have the nostalgia factor to catch all the references, which might be the case if you're watching this video. So a lot of people are dismissing any criticism of the movie's plot or character work by saying, "It's a kids movie, what did you expect?" Well, I expected it to be better. I'm not asking for Citizen Kane here, but I expected it to be a movie that you can bring your parents to and they can have a fun time watching, even though they've never played on a Nintendo before. I expected there to be a story that anyone can be engrossed by with characters that anyone can root for. Those things are obviously there, you can't make a movie without them, but they're far from bulletproof. Nintendo and Illumination clearly made a decision to play it as safe as possible, throw it to the kids, and let the movie coast on nostalgia and curiosity for all of the adults that want to see the Mario movie. They called it the Super Mario Bros. Movie because that's the proposition. They're basically saying, hey, we made a real, proper Mario movie. Come see how we made it, and not much more. The Mario brand is so huge that that's enough. However, here's the big sticking point for me. I don't see why making a quote-unquote kids movie and making a great movie have to be mutually exclusive. There are countless examples of animated children's films that are critically acclaimed in their own right. The obvious source of examples here is Pixar. They've got like a dozen films with deep, original storytelling, emotional weight, and immense financial and critical success. I don't think anyone can argue that. Of course, there are also the successes we've seen in recent years, like Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse and Puss in Boots: The Last Wish. I guess you could argue that these movies are for a slightly older audience at minimum, and Nintendo wanted to capture young kids, so maybe they have some elements that they would consider inappropriate or boring. However, I think the best example here is Wreck-It Ralph. It's a movie all about video games. I mean, I think it's literally based on Mario vs. Donkey Kong as far as I can tell. And it's a great combination of storytelling, comedy, and fan service. It's been a while since I've seen it, but I don't remember anything particularly violent or inappropriate. In fact, it's exactly the balance I was hoping Nintendo would strike with this movie. So ultimately, I do think this comes down to Nintendo wanting to play it safe after being scarred by the 1993 Mario movie. They were probably afraid of damaging the Mario brand and waiting another 30 years to make another movie. So the Mario movie is clearly not as great as it could have been, but the question is, does that even matter? It certainly doesn't seem like it. It's only been 1 week since it came out, and it has had the biggest opener for an animated movie ever. It beat out Frozen 2. It hasn't even come out in Japan yet, and this is Mario we're talking about. I can easily see this coasting to $1 billion in box office revenue. General audiences are clearly happy with this movie, down to the Rotten Tomatoes score. So who cares, right? That's all that matters in the end, the critics can shut up. Well, no, here's the problem. This isn't the only Mario movie we're getting. Well, nothing's been announced yet, but there's been rumors of a DK spin-off for some time now, there's some obvious sequel bait in the movie, and it's a huge financial success, so it's all but confirmed. Given those facts, I think it's fair to say Nintendo had to make an impression to carry the momentum forward. We all know video game adaptations have had a rough history, and we've only just started to get some better ones in recent years, like The Last of Us, Detective Pikachu, and the Sonic movies. For my money, Mario is basically the face of gaming. He's like Superman is to comic books, so it would have been a real statement if this movie was among the best video game adaptations ever made. You know what, it probably counts as one of them anyway since it's not a complete mess, but still, it could have been amazing instead of good. Anyway, let's say we get a Mario movie 2 in 2026 or something. If it's around the same quality as this one, I'm sure it'll still do great, but it'll probably lose much of the casual audience. A lot of people are probably watching this movie just because they're curious about it. They're there to witness the spectacle, and the novelty of that doesn't carry over to any sequels. If they're not catching Easter eggs, then you need to grip them with compelling characters or story. Otherwise, you'll get Nintendo fans and kids next time, but you won't get anyone else. And you know what? Other than a Mario movie 2, I'm not confident in a DK spin-off or anything else doing that well. Donkey Kong was cool, but he didn't steal the show. I'm not even sure if I would watch a Donkey Kong spin-off. This goes beyond Mario too. I think all of us were thinking the same thing when we first heard about the Mario movie. If this goes well, we could get a Nintendo cinematic universe. Move over, Marvel, the NCU is in full throttle, right? Well, if that's what Nintendo wants to do, this is far from a stable foundation. The first MCU movie was Iron Man, and audiences and critics loved that movie. However, it would be fair to say that the movies between Iron Man and the first Avengers movie were less good. So maybe if the next few movies in the Nintendo cinematic universe are better, it can still work. But I'm not confident. Mario can get a pass because it's Mario, and everyone is fine with it being a shallow but cute kids movie. But they can't do that with Zelda or Metroid. Those movies have to actually be good. Especially something like Metroid that isn't popular enough to carry the movie with brand power alone. So what should Nintendo do if they want to build their own cinematic universe? Well, I wouldn't trust Illumination with those riskier properties. I feel like I'm hitting on Illumination too much. Look, they have their formula, they can churn out extremely successful kids movies on small budgets, that's perfectly fine. You can probably give Illumination Kirby, or Animal Crossing, or Pikmin even, but not Zelda, don't give them Zelda. So who do you work with to make a Zelda movie? A lot of people are saying Studio Ghibli, and I think an anime studio would be awesome, but it can't really cross over properly if it's 2D animated. They're also not going to work with Ghibli, or Pixar, or Sony, or anyone else because Nintendo is in a deep business partnership with Universal. I mean, they've been building Nintendo sections in Universal theme parks. They ultimately chose Illumination because they're owned by Universal. However, there's another animation house that Universal owns, and that's DreamWorks. Puss in Boots: The Last Wish seems like a great movie, so if they can make it happen for Zelda, then by all means. If they can't do that, then I guess they'll just have to tighten their leash on Illumination and force them to make a good movie, but I would be very worried in that situation. They can't repeat what they did with the Mario movie and expect it to do well. Anyway, in conclusion, it's a good movie. The Mario movie is a good movie. I don't want to be too negative. It could have been way, way worse. I'm glad it wasn't an absolute train wreck. It was far from it, really. Even if it's not everything I ever dreamed of, I still went home and turned on my dusty old Wii U for the first time in months to play some Mario. And ultimately, that's all that matters. Getting Mario back into people's heads and getting his games back into people's hands. The movie is still an absolute treat for anyone who loves Mario, and it's a huge financial success. I just hope that they take a page out of the Sonic movie playbook and make any sequels or spin-offs or other Nintendo movies better in every way. Anyway, Danny DeVito Wario for the sequel, please, Nintendo? Nintendo, I'm begging you.
Oh my God!